when we're talking about a film, we talk about the social nutrition checklist. And that, we talk about whether or not the film was union made, whether or not it passed the Bechdel test. Of course, is the film class conscious? But we always lead off with, did it qualify for the ReFrame Stamp, which is really kind of a metric to judge how diverse the film is above the line, stars, producer, director, writer, and amongst its senior crew. Now, that is a gross oversimplification of what the ReFrame Stamp is and what the ReFrame Project is, which is why we brought in a ringer tonight. We are very fortunate to welcome the director of the ReFrame Project, Ms. Andria Wilson Mirza. Andria, welcome
Hello.
to Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure is very much ours. Jim, if it's cool with you, I'd like to start right away with Andria and just ask her, you know what, Andria, could you give us a better elevator pitch than what I usually kind of mumble through on our shows on not just what the ReFrame Stamp is, but what the ReFrame Project is?
Absolutely. I'd love to. So ReFrame is an organization that was founded out of the Sundance Institute and Women in Film as a joint alliance, a joint coalition that was all about how do we address and improve gender equity in Hollywood. So one of the first products that was released by ReFrame was the ReFrame Stamp, which is essentially a mark of distinction presented to films and television shows that hit, as you said, these kind of key metrics in their hiring practices. Are they hiring women? Are they hiring women of color? Are they in decision-making positions? All that good stuff. So we dole out the ReFrame Stamp, as I said, to both feature film and television production throughout the entire year. We just made our TV announcement a couple of weeks ago, which showed some huge improvements actually in episodic content, which is very interesting. And then ReFrame has additional programs that kind of try to tackle this major pervasive issue from, different sides. So we also have a pipeline program called Reframe Rise, which supports women directors in their work in the industry. And then we also have a series of culture change programs that we deliver directly to the studios in Hollywood. So working it kind of from the consumer angle, from behind the scenes with the studios, and really working in collaboration with all of the amazing organizations that are doing work to advance equity in Hollywood and, therefore around the globe.
Very cool. What brought you to the project? Understand when we were chatting with you just before the show started that we learned you are Canadian, actually. You're, of course, also Angelino, right? If you live in Los Angeles, you're an Angelino. You're now an Angelino, but you are a Canadian. What brought you to the project?
Yeah, well, I'm a proud Canadian. I was the executive director of a film festival in Toronto called Inside Out, which is the largest LGBTQ film festival in Canada. I also work as a film producer. I work primarily with independent projects from women and queer creators trying to move their work to the next level. So I came from Inside Out, the festival where I was leading the org and programming the festival, into advocacy very naturally as that being the space that I was living in. And when ReFrame was looking for new leadership, it really just felt like an ideal fit. It felt like the right time. I also am incredibly privileged to be married to a brilliant filmmaker, writer, director who also lives here in LA. So it all kind of came together, and I'm so grateful to be doing this work from here. Now, that said, through the pandemic, I was basically just doing this work from my apartment, as many people are working remotely. So here in Los Angeles, but spending most of the time looking into this screen, having these kinds of conversations.
Yeah. Do you find just how much smoother everyone is with the whole online thing? Jim and I started this. Jim and I started this as our COVID, part of our COVID coping technique. really was born out of that. But I can only imagine from a producer's standpoint, like, are you really chomping at the bit as things relax to just, no, I need to communicate with you face to face. I need to see
Yeah.
I need to see the team in front of me. I need to see how they're reacting.
Yeah, I'm really eager to get back on set. I'm eager to be doing live Q&As with filmmakers in person. I got to do one for an event a couple of months ago, and I actually got to sit down in a room with two filmmakers for the first time in over a year. And
Whoa.
that it made me so emotional because I'd been like y'all, talking to people in these boxes, and to actually share a room and the conversation, just it was so moving. So that's a piece that I am safely, with all the right conditions, hoping to return more to very soon.
What has been one of the most, you look at your website, and folks, the ReFrame Project, the website link is down in the description, and I'll put it up on the screen in a second. But, going beyond the metrics, going on beyond the data analysis, like you have a team of ambassadors, you got Reframe Rise, which I only know from skimming your website. But that's got to have generated some stories. Can you tell us about an anecdote that illustrate the ReFrame Project, what it's doing practically on the ground?
Absolutely.
And how it's changing things?
Yeah, I think the what makes ReFrame really unique in the space of, all of these exceptional organizations that are doing work to change the face of Hollywood, is that all of the work is research based, and it was created and designed with these tactics to have like maximum impact. So, with the Rise program, for example, that was specifically designed as an intervention for mid-career women directors. So acknowledging the fact that for many women working in the independent film space, we can get a short film made, we can get 2 short films made, maybe we can even get an independent feature financed and released on the festival circuit. But for us to make the jump to the studio system, and then to have a sustainable career in that system, there are so many barriers and so many fallout points. So with Rise, we're really working with directors who are at that point, who need that targeted support. And Rise is not a traditional mentorship program, it's a sponsorship program. It recognizes, how do you get hired in Hollywood? You got to get on a list. You got to be on the right list to get in the right room. And that, that's 80% of the challenge right there. So what ReFrame Rise does is takes our network of ambassadors, of studio executives, of successful producers, and matches them with these mid-career women directors to ensure that they get to the next level. So for some of our Rise directors, their goal might be, say, I've directed a couple episodes of television, but I really want to direct a pilot. And we had in our Rise class this past session a director named Hanalei Culpepper, who her goal was to direct a pilot, and through ReFrame Rise, she booked the pilot of Kung Fu. And it was just recently announced that she's going to also be directing the pilot of the new Neil Gaiman series, Anansi Boys. So really exciting to see those interventions have that kind of impact.
Where do you see the ReFrame Project in 5 years? I'm sorry, Jim, I've been stupid excited about this interview. So I'm like, I have another question, and I've got all kinds of, I could just go on and on, but Jim, feel free to cut me off.
You can fill me in. And I should say to Andrea that Rob's has been a proponent of this for a long time, and he has it on our checklist on the graphics and that sort of thing too. So he's been a big advocate of this project for a long time.
Well, okay, maybe this is a quick time, Andrea, to, much like the Bechdel test, Jim and I use this, and this is for everybody. Jim and I use this not so much that it's like, oh, what is that? We're adults here. We're all adults here. I clicked the not for children. Never stating that virtual signaling bullshit. we do it as much as Jim and I are middle-aged white guys in our 50s, Canadian. If we didn't do this, we may not notice. Just like the Bechdel test, if you didn't ask the question, you may go through the whole movie saying, I don't see the problem. Ask the question. And it's the same thing with the ReFrame Stamp. And once you start asking the question, you start to go, whoa, we have a long list of movies that would never qualify. That
Totally.
And so, yeah. I want to make sure that, it's not a. Although I don't know, Andrea. Let me ask you this: we have to be, though, like Jim and I have got to be. Maybe not the only, but one of the very, very few online or traditional that actually say, well, does it have this? Does it have this? Does it? Right? Or is it, no, Rob, there's 20. You've just in Winnipeg.
No, I think, you know what? I think it's so fantastic what y'all are doing, because when, the ReFrame Project started before I came along, right? I came into a work in progress, and it was designed really initially as almost like a B2B, a business to business initiative, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was, how do we get the studios to get on board with this? It was all about the internal marketing. And now I really see an incredible potential in going to the consumer, because, I think there are many people who are looking for that, that tie-in to their values in what they're consuming. So if there's a way to say, this aligns with what I believe, what I think, what I tell my kids about, how I want the world to look, then I think that's really helpful from a consumer perspective. So I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with folks who, like me, love film, are passionate about, supporting great film and great content, and also are looking at that social consciousness element of it. And, one thing I want to say about the stamp that I found very unique also coming into this work, is that it's looking at, to a degree, gender balance, gender representation. So it's not saying every single role in your crew is staffed by a woman or by someone of an underrepresented gender, right? It's saying, are 4 of your 8 department heads women? Are you
Could
at
we
parity?
At least have half?
Right? Are out of writer, director, and lead cast, we would like one of those roles to be a woman. Yeah. So it's really, in my opinion, in 5 years, it's going to be so easy that everyone will get it, and we'll have to completely look at, what is the issue in that moment. And I hope that gender parity is no longer an issue. I hope that this is so onboarded and so successful that it becomes obsolete.
This is
before, I just wanted to mention for guys like the Upside Dan who's currently watching, WandaVision was just stamped, given the stamp. So these aren't just these are all across all different kinds of productions as well. Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Oh yeah, no, great point. I understand that it's industry focused. It is. You know what? The great thing, and bring up what I think is your mission statement. I got it from the Creating Culture manual. I got it from your manual.
Great.
But it's our mission is to catalyze a culture shift, engaging decision makers from the top to ensure lasting gender parity at every level in Hollywood. This leads to a question from our chat. Richard L. says, really interesting, does the ReFrame Project look at only Hollywood productions? For example, would be fascinating to see how Canadian movies compare to US, British, Scandinavian, etc. films.
This is a great question. So ReFrame Project, where it was started by Sundance Institute, which does program international content, but is at its heart, a US-based organization, and also Women in Film Los Angeles. It certainly had a Hollywood focus from the jump. And I think that a big part of what the research indicated at that time was that, well, if Hollywood can do this, the industry writ large will follow. Now, we've seen just the 5 years that ReFrame has existed, many countries, Sweden, for example, has made exceptional progress from a funding perspective in terms of gender parity. Canada also, Telefilm Canada just released recently that in last year's projects that were funded, they actually hit parity in terms of creators. Now, there's a much deeper conversation to be had there about, intersectionality and the identities of these women as well. But I think we have seen this progress. So one of the expansions that I see for ReFrame in the coming years is to take a more global perspective, especially as we see these large studios like Netflix is probably the easiest example, now working in so many countries and producing and financing in so many countries, that they're bringing their corporate values of inclusion into those productions. So we should also be able to evaluate those productions too. So in the current moment, we're only looking at projects that have US distribution. So we do look at projects that were not necessarily produced. There's a number of Canadian productions that have received the stamp.
The domestic market, including Canada, because
yes. Well, and also
a deeper conversation,
a much deeper conversation, but also the roles align. Like, something that is important to consider is that in different countries and different markets, there are different job titles, there are different union structures, there are different ways that films are packaged and put together. So our analysis metric may not fit. Particularly for television, the way television is made in South Asia, for example, versus how it's made in Hollywood is very, very different. So,
well, I suppose in a spirit of cooperation, solidarity, and intersectionality, you want to be one of those identifying partners and leaders within any of those countries that you may want to compare and contrast, so that it isn't like, here we have the solution.
Completely.
Country goes, doesn't fit us at all. Thank you very much, Americans.
Well, and frankly, this is a conversation we have even in producing content in America, because shooting a show in Atlanta is very different than shooting a show in New York, is very different than, shooting a show in New Orleans, is very different than shooting a show, here in LA, in terms of, the population, in terms of how the crew reflects the population of that community. So, I think looking at it on a global scale, absolutely. I don't think it's necessarily about rolling our values into, another market. I think it's about, looking at each community and where the need is, where the opportunity is for those metrics and for those measures to come in, where we can support.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not, film is a global business. One of the things I think, let's say as a Canadian, a lot of the films, I'll bring it up here because I love to do the math, because I'm that kind of jerk. If you look at the current domestic box office, like if you looked at so you got, of course, in the top 10 alone, Black Widow, F9, A Quiet Place, Godzilla vs. Kong, blah, 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 you will find, folks, to everyone, Canadian tax credits in almost every single one. Because film is not, yes, maybe principal photography was shot here, except for 8 different second units all over the Elsaf acre. Post-production services, how much post-production is done in Andria? You better equipped to answer this than I am. How much post-production, how much special effects, how much rotoscoping is done in Montreal? It's got to be, because you see those Montreal-based SFX, or not special, visual effects companies. So I think what's interesting about the ReFrame, even though it's focused on Hollywood, so many countries, I think, have a real stake culturally and economically in Hollywood. And so there is an opportunity for everyone to learn and progress. Does that make sense to you guys? Feel free to say I'm talking out of my ass.
Well, no,
it will not be the first time.
I think one of the great points that you raise, like, is about the tax credit. And, I participated in some conversations here in LA around the diversity incentive in the tax credit for shooting in Los Angeles County. And I think that's a conversation that is really growing, which is, how do we tie the financing of a production to these goals that a state or a province or a city might have for advancing equity in a particular industry. So it's directly tied, and I think there's a real opportunity for leadership there.
What? Okay, first we got another question from the chat. It is out of scope of this conversation. That said, I have an opinion on this that I will share later when we get it into the spoiler zone. But I did want to, Andrea, do you want to comment on DMG's, what do you think of the Suicide Squad's representation? And again, it was what brought you on. Don't know if you've seen the film, don't know if it's within the scope of your job, but at the same time, if you want to answer, knock yourself out.
Totally. I mean, I actually haven't seen it yet. I absolutely will see it. I have gone back to the cinema, when my mask and my little bubble of relative safety. I have gone back to the cinema and seen a few things, which has been a real joy. The Suicide Squad does not earn the ReFrame stamp. I think that is likely evident on its face. I'm a huge fan of Margot Robbie. I'm always happy to see, her working. She always, brings a lot. I think she's exceptionally talented. She's also a brilliant producer, in my opinion. And I think her company that she runs is doing some really great things in terms of supporting emerging voices. And I'm a huge fan of what she's done. I think, something that, and this feels tangential, but I'm kind of talking around something that you may notice if you look at the crew list of the Suicide Squad, is that there are several directors working in Hollywood that have, gotten to a really high level, that are exceptionally talented, like Barry Jenkins or Ryan Coogler, that have worked with women department heads throughout their career. In Barry Jenkins, it's, his incredible editor, Joy McMillan, they went to film school together. In the case of Ryan Coogler, it's the exceptional director of photography, Rachel Morrison, one of the first women cinematographers to shoot a film at that budget level. And so as they rise, the women they work with rise as well. So I think for male writer directors, there's an opportunity in how you build your team and how you hire those department heads to really lead by example. In the case of this film, there are a couple of women department heads, I think production design, perhaps, but, when you don't see it in those key roles that we measure, that, we see that impact as well. But I haven't seen the film yet, so from a content perspective, I can't comment.
Yeah.
It's, go ahead, Jim.
Hand up. Still works from grade school. Just quick question.
Quick interjection. How Canadian?
Yeah. What was the just kind of a fun first question? What was the first movie you saw when you went back, Andrea?
The first movie. Okay, so the first movie I saw in person in the indoor theater was Zola when that opened. I also saw Black Widow. Actually, when I went home to Toronto a few weeks ago, got to see Black Widow in the IMAX in Toronto at the Scotiabank Theatre. So that was a real treat. And I have been throughout the pandemic going to drive-ins as much as possible.
Oh yes.
Because I actually really love drive-ins, and I love the resurgence of them through the pandemic. And getting to have that experience, including I was incredibly lucky to get to see a drive-in screening of Thelma and Louise for the 30th anniversary, which watching that film in a car is actually, I think, what was probably originally intended. It's so fantastic to watch it in a car.
Yeah.
Did you, were you in a rag top and some sort of convertible? Did you?
Sadly, I was not. However, Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon were in attendance, and they actually had one of the
Whoa,
film production cars
Oh,
on
really? One of the picture
site.
vehicles.
Yeah,
That's
so
Super
that
cool.
was pretty magical to see
pretty
for
cool.
sure.
What's your? This is a quick follow up, and I have another one after that. But what's your go to drive in theater? Like, where is it in the basin or whatever?
You know,
We're looking for a recommend, Andrea.
right. The thing is, I really love these kind of pop-up drive-in experiences that emerged over the pandemic, right? Like back home in Toronto, I went to a few drive-ins at the Ontario place, down by Lake Ontario. Here in LA, I've been to them in parking lots, in open fields, on the side of a mountain. There's a great one in Malibu that I think was a wedding venue prior to the pandemic. So, it's necessity is the mother of invention, and definitely getting to see, folks kind of pivot their operations into the drive-in has been pretty cool.
Yeah. I should mention where the question I was meaning to get to was, so in your position, when you watch anything, could be an old movie, could be a new movie, could be a television show that's brand new, do you find it hard to not think of ReFrame when you're watching it? Like, is that an automatic thing for you now, where you're like, and then you're checking the lists and the IMDb page and stuff like that? Is that possible for you to watch without sort of immediately?
That's a really great question. I have always loved film and worked in film because I really believe in the magic and the power of cinema. And like I go along for the ride, I get transported, I get, taken to that place. And, you kind of can't take the glasses off once they're on, like I for sure feel that. And, I think it's what brought me into this work is that, I think initially growing up, like growing up queer, feeling isolated, wanting to see, representations, things that would inspire me, where I could feel, a future, another life for myself. And I think now for me, I want more, now I am looking through that credits list with a fine tooth comb, because for me, representation is not liberation. It's really about, how are the means of production being managed and controlled, and who's allowed into that process. Like, that's what I'm looking for. And that's the piece that I kind of can't turn off, even if I'm really, really enjoying the film.
Yeah. Understandable.
It's interesting you bring that up, like it, kind of a riff on, I'm not necessarily the Marshall McLuhan fan that others may be. I'm not a fan at all, but there's ReFrame, what we're doing with the class consciousness or whatever you want, our social nutrition checklist. It's kind of the maker is the message, or at least a part of the message is the people who made it, where they came from, who they, but okay, that's kind of a ramble. I swear to God, there's a question in there. Who knows? We'll move on.
I want to say, I hear you, because I think that what we're really looking at now is, we're able to look at a thing and say, I love this thing, but that doesn't mean it's perfect, like there is, and that's how I feel about this industry. I love it, and it's where I dreamed of working my whole life, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room to make it an easier place for people like me to work. Like there still is that room for improvement. And why I say that, representation isn't liberation. It's like, I don't just want, films that star more, individuals of a particular demographic. I want them to be created with the authentic voice and truth of people also from those communities. So it's like that next level, that next step And of course, like, people getting paid. This is a major industry. How are we, doling out those dollars, and who gets access to them? Is really the big question.
What do you then see is and it's something I briefly touched on before, before we went live. Where do you see class in, maybe it isn't necessarily ReFrame. Maybe it's ReFrame 2 or a few, but where do you see class as another factor in representation? Because, and when I say it's not just the class of the makers, although I think that's important. And as we discussed before, a woman of color is a pretty good predictor in North America of someone coming from a working class or a poor background. But still, given how hard it is to get into film anyway, may still not be as accurate a predictor as, hey, can we have more working class voices above the line and see how that folds out into content? Where do you see, and a perfectly reasonable answer is, well, that's not really what ReFrame is, but yeah, where do you see potentially ReFrame being? How Canadian? Let me give you 8,000 excuses not to answer this question.
No, I'd love
we do not want any social confrontation.
I'll take it. I'll wade right into it. I think where I see the next step of ReFrame, so not in 5 years, but within the year, is an expansion of our stamp, not just our stamp criteria, but our analysis and the data that we're actually looking at, so that, when we're looking at a particular individual who happens to be, a department head on a production, we're working with, a third-party data system that allows that individual to opt into a much wider range of identifiers. Where they could say, well, I'm LGBTQ, or I'm a veteran, or I have a disability. And so that we're able to have aggregate data that tells us a lot more about who is and who isn't included, who is and who isn't working at a particular budget level, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think that when we talk about class, what we really, the
socioeconomic strata.
Precisely, and the crux of the problem is that, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's really held up by these kind of financial ideals. Like, well, giving a film to this individual is more risky than giving it to this individual, and it's all about risk mitigation and liability, and that prevents people from moving forward because of prejudice, because of racism, because of systemic inequality, and people not getting the opportunity to even get to a certain level in the business where they can pitch on some of these productions where they could be earning more money. There are a lot of ways that people are kept out. One of the big things that I feel really passionate about ReFrame getting involved in is actually the fight to get creators paid during the development process. I think people don't realize how long it takes to get
hurdle.
paid. It's wild. Like, truly, the amount of people that are developing a feature film, or a television production, sometimes for 2 years without seeing a dime. And this is even in a union environment, because there are all of these ways to kind of get around it. It's hugely problematic, and it keeps many people from getting in, because who can sustain themselves without getting a paycheck for 2 years, right? Only people that
you're
come
a
from
cinematographer who has a vision, but you're like, my regular paycheck is shooting other people's
completely.
effort.
Yeah. And so I think that is the biggest class advancement barrier in Hollywood, is just literally not getting paid, and having to find a way to get through it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something, when I first got into the local film, and it was American service productions, right? But you could see it even on the local level, never mind on the LA level, where it's who's supporting you while you are going without for a couple of years hustling your 3 or 8 or 20 scripts or whatever.
Totally. It's a real challenge. So I think there are so many ways that, class difference and, that intersects throughout the business, and has great negative impact often. But I think the unpaid development is one that I feel really passionate about, finding ways to address that in the system and really create a structure where we're getting a little bit closer to a level playing field.
Gotcha. Listen, I promised we'd have your digital Uber ready at quarter after. That said, we do have like 3 more questions, or let's say I have one more question. We got one more question from the chat. And Jim, do you have another question?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Go. Can you take 3, Andria?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. I'll just text the Uber driver. Okay, Jim, go.
Yeah,
You're up,
well, I
baby.
was just taking a look recently at the website, and it's pretty exciting to see the productions that are getting. It just seems to be coming together really well. I know a lot of projects that I've seen get started and sort of slowly grind to a halt, but this one there seems to be some momentum behind it. Then you have other publications picking up on your releases and your announcements and that sort of thing. It sounds like it's a pretty exciting time for the project. Do you find yourself sort of getting into work every morning, checking your email or whatever? Is that sort of it sounds like it would be exciting for you. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think, I do feel energized by the moment we're in. And, I feel energized by the work that there still is to be done. Like just recently with our TV analysis report, seeing that, 51% of the most popular television programs of 2020-21 earned the ReFrame Stamp. That is a significant jump. It was 33% in the prior year. So it is showing that there are improvements being made. I mean, it's also showing that on that episodic side, it's moving much faster than the feature film side. But, that's a whole other conversation. But I do feel like it is energizing, and based on my conversations with studio executives, we can't let up. We have to keep going. We have to double down, because the goal is sustained and sustainable change. It's not just a trend or a moment. It really has to be like investment in future generations on generations to really see this grow. And so that trickles down to like the fight for better pay for assistants right now that's happening in Hollywood, and other issues. It's we can't just look at the top. We have to look at every way that people come into this business and how we can create a better place for them to work.
I would imagine it's kind of like I'm thinking parental leave.
Absolutely.
You need a certain amount of time. So 1980, Canadian Union Postal Workers struck for it. Mid 93, 94, Chrétien brings it in as policy. There's a magic point, probably around 2000, maybe 2010, where all of a sudden, like the fact that I grew up during this, but right now, if you just ask me about parental leave, all I'd be like, well, hasn't it always been that way? How could you not have it? Like there's that. What do you think that magic number is? Is it 5 years seems a little, there's still going to be too many people who need a procedure like myself, who like a checklist to kind of go, oh, am I really on track? Because if you just leave me to my own devices, through no malice intent, we'll get up. But the older dinosaurs who don't have that, like what is that magic number? 5 years, maybe a little light. 20 years would be wonderful, but I don't know. Would it even be 20?
It's a great thing to think about. And I think maybe the way I feel about it is that we have to acknowledge that everyone has bias, right? We all have bias. We wake up with it. We take it out into the world, and eradicating bias is a goal, but perhaps not a super realistic one during our lifetimes. But I think being able to increase people's intercultural competency, their empathy. And I think having a checklist, having guideposts, having reminders is actually like, we may need that forever, because we're all still looking from our own perspective, as educated as we may become, and as much as that competency may grow. So I think the long game is maybe really just about getting us all to be honest with ourselves, and to own that and say, like, I am a work in progress, and these are the tools that I use to make sure that I'm practicing equity in my everyday life, and in my work, and recognizing the power that I have to make change. I think that's the future that I'd like to see.
Gotcha. We still we haven't gotten rid of curbs or speed limits.
Right, seatbelts, yeah.
Okay, we do a couple. Just DMG asks, Andrea, which studios are the easiest to work with / progressive on a practical level?
Great question. There's pros and cons in every space. I think everyone is taking a slightly different tack when it comes to equity and inclusion within their own company. And a lot of that is informed by the culture of that company or who their target audiences are. Something that I will say about Netflix that I have found very interesting and inspiring is that they have a team that really, to go back to the question earlier about the global interaction with other countries and looking at those metrics, they have teams that are working on talent development in all of the countries where they make content. So including Canada, so that is something that really makes a longer term impact. So let's say, they're shooting a film in a particular region where there are no women cinematographers. They would work with local organizations to perhaps start to create an on-set mentorship or a shadowing program so that folks who otherwise may have faced barriers to that opportunity are able to get on set and learn from that. So I think in terms of progressive, I see that as being genuinely progressive and also really making an impact, right? The ability to not create in a way that's extractive or harming the community that you're shooting in, but actually trying to leave something positive behind. Taking that kind of approach would make a really significant impact on our industry if that was something that studios were doing more across the board. Gotcha.
One more question before we get you in your Uber. What about the ReFrame Project, or heck, about anything about what you do now? Andrea, what would you like the public to know that it's either just clueless about, or maybe it thinks is, but really isn't?
I think Hollywood is much more conservative than people think. And, there is a thought that Hollywood is very liberal, and that the majority of the people that work in Hollywood have progressive values, but it's fiscally conservative. Each film needs to make money. There's financial models that are built in a certain way that create a conservative mindset. And so to move forward with progressive values, that's why I say, we have to really keep going, keep it up. And I think audiences and individuals who love movies have the power to push and to advocate for that change via social media, by buying a ticket to films that are demonstrating that equity. That's really where there is power to change, when we can prove that there is a business case behind making inclusive sets and creating authentic content that can make a huge impact.
Super cool. Is there any, if there was something you could ask Jim and I, our audience, to do tomorrow, that one simple thing, what would it be that could help you forward your agenda?
Great question. I think,
I finally got a great question.
I think the truth of the matter is, there really is something to where you're putting your dollars, and so I think buying a ticket to a film that has earned the ReFrame stamp in its first weekend, things like that makes an impact. If we can demonstrate the sales, if we can, show that there's a direct correlation between people learning, wow, this was a really cool, inclusive production that, hired all of these super talented women department heads, therefore I'm going to go and support it. That absolutely has an impact. And there's lots of organizations also, like locally in different markets, that are doing this advocacy work, that might be supporting independent filmmakers in their opening weekends, things like that. So I think, just being mindful that this is a business, and being able to make that business case really supports us all.
Yeah, there's on your website, and I've just got it up on the screen now. There's all these groups that you guys work with: Alliance for Women Film Composers, Amplify, Asian Pacific American Media Coalition, the Blacklist. I will eventually get on the blacklist. I too could be blacklisted. Okay, Andria, thank you so very much. For folks who want to follow what's going on, like I know for ReFrame, on Twitter, it's at ReFrame Project.
You got it.
And then, of course, and again, these links are down in the description. It's reframeproject.org. Andria, on Twitter, can I share that? I found it publicly.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
If people want to engage with you or follow you, see what you're up to, it's Andria Wilson, at Andria Wilson on Twitter. Anything else you want to tell us before we let the door hit you? We've got your coat.
Yeah, got my
the
coat
digital
on.
cars waiting outside.
Well, just, thanks y'all for what you're doing. I think it's so important to create the space for folks to, have these conversations and, really think critically about the media you love. Because that's adds so much to the work that we all do. And I really appreciate your time, appreciate you reaching out. And we'll keep you posted on any exciting developments.
You bet.
Excellent.
No pressure. Can you be on our show every week?
We would love to have you back, though. I'm sure sometime in the future.
I'd love that.
Don't block our email, I guess.
I would love that, and have fun talking about the Suicide Squad.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting conversation. It's one of those. You're Canadian. You would understand this reference. Hawkins cheesies. The king of cheesies. It's one of the reasons Jim and I do the social nutrition checklist. It's to acknowledge that sometimes you just want some Hawkins cheesies. You look at it and you kind of go, I shouldn't be eating this every day because that's not healthy in any way. And that's kind of our approach. We understand, especially when you look at the vast majority of cinema, the top 25, I cannot believe this, you guys, the top 25 films on the 2021 box office list released, they suck up 89% of the dollars, of the box office dollars. And yet people talk about streaming and everything. Yeah, 6 of the top 10 were doing day and date. Like streaming, like they just take all of the money. So I think work like what you guys are doing, in our little corner, what we're doing is to acknowledge that there's more that goes on than just you sitting in front of the screen, having ideas and images projected on you, and that you can look behind and go, oh, maybe I shouldn't eat as much of this as I should. This might not be healthy. Every now and then, though, you do want a Hawkins cheesy, and that's what the Suicide Squad is.
Well, enjoy your snack, and have a great conversation, and we'll see you again.
All right. Thanks again, Andria.
Thanks so much.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.